degrees Celsius. The visibility is mediocre, but no matter. Tony has to dive.
Our fishing season starts around April, runs for anywhere up to 2.5 to 3 months. We take a team of divers up to 48. That's mainly we'll take down the coast on up to half a dozen different motherships. We tow the divers, we call them drift divers. Drift diving, we tow them along the bottom where their sole purpose of being down there is picking up the shell, the wild shell, and during the day the divers will spend up to 8 hours a day underwater using our device tables to ensure that we have no decompression illness.
Not only do the divers have to find the oysters, but they also have to keep a sharp eye out for the many dangers. Sharks and deadly jellyfish, for example. Tony earns a good living with this work, but it's quite risky. A few years ago, while he was working for another company, Tony witnessed a tragic event that deeply affected him.
There is some big fish out here. We have had attacks in the past. Probably, as I remember in my time, there's probably about half a dozen attacks, and a fatality in '93, which was a mate of mine who got taken. The water was dirty, poor fizz, about less than a metre, and his dive buddy came up complaining of no air, got the surface, and the hose had been bitten in half, so he put the hose in with nothing on the end. About a week later, we found his body in a shark that we caught. But yeah, it was pretty tragic for the whole industry and everyone involved. It's always in the back of your head, especially in dirty water when you're working in zero visibility. I think it's like anything what you've been doing for so long, you just take it as part of your job.
Once the wild oysters have been gathered, they're brought on board the impressive boat lab, equipped with a sort of operating room. About 50 people live and work on board, 25 of them highly trained surgical technicians. This is a gold-lipped Pintada maxima, more commonly known as the South Sea pearl oyster. As oysters go, it's huge and produces a brilliant nacre with a satin sheen. To produce pearls, they first have to gather wild oysters, then seed them in a top-secret operation that takes place behind this partition. Each oyster has to be delicately pried open in order to implant a nucleus, a small pellet of special limestone. The foreign body will remain inside for 2 years while the oyster coats it with nacre. Once the seeding is done, the whole crew is mobilized to put the oysters back into their natural habitat. Only now they're held in baskets so they don't drift off the current. For the first few months after the operation, the oysters are closely monitored. Every day, Tony and the other divers have to keep a watchful eye on their precious oysters.
We describe it as being underwater labourer. The work itself is strenuous. It's like pushing a wheelbarrow underwater. Imagine that. We're in 20 metres of water most of the time, which is 3 atmospheres of pressure. So you've got those extra pressures on your body while you're working. You're lifting and carrying things unnatural ways. Yeah, you do get worn out quite quick.
Like a nurse at a patient's bedside, Tony has to make sure that the gold-lipped Pintada maxima are recovering from their operation. It's tedious work alone at the bottom of the sea, and one has to be in excellent physical shape to be able to operate in such conditions. For Tony, the love of adventure and the rush of adrenaline are his life's blood. No, you're not seeing things. Tony is really toying with a sea snake. But he has to be careful, for one bite from this snake could be deadly. Luckily, Tony's wetsuit is thick enough to protect him from the lethal fangs.
It's just a passion for diving and being on the ocean. Came up this way surfing and fishing, and ended up jumping on one of the pearl boats to start with when I was a young fellow, and pursued it. Been with it for nearly 20 years, so I've never had a bad day.
We're about to leave the operations grounds that we're at Sandy Point, and then head up into the Buccaneer Archipelago into Talbot Bay. It's going to be about a 16-hour run for us. We should be there probably tomorrow afternoon.
To get to Talbot Bay, our boat has to go north 300 kilometers, then round Cape Levesque, where it ventures into the labyrinth of the Buccaneer Islands.
There's thousands of islands, inlets, channels, great tides. It's uninhabited, and it's just a fantastic area. The early morning light and the late afternoon light is when you see it at its best. It can look very harsh in the midday sun, because it's a harsh environment. There's a lot of local knowledge required, not only to safely navigate through these areas, because they're poorly charted, but it's a beautiful area. It's beauty in its ruggedness, I think.
In this maze of land and sea, we see a few scattered installations. These are the pearl oyster beds. After recovering from their operation, the oysters spend close to 2 years here. It's a breathtaking spot, and so isolated and remote that there's no pollution. Perfect for the oysters.
We're at Talbot Bay, in the centre, in the heartland of the archipelago now. This is our Talbot Bay pearl farm. It's a floating pearl farm. 13 people live here. And look what's in here. Have a look at this. It's just an aquarium. It's fantastic. Out of fishing to top the day off. Let's see how lucky we can be today. A lot of people, this is the reason they come to work here, so they can fish. It's more than a sport. It's a way of life for a lot of people fishing. Oh yeah! There's a fish! Here's another one. Look, there's a croc coming in. Look at him. Very unusual for a croc to come in this class. You can jump clean into the boat without batting an eyelid. If you've ever gone on a jumping croc cruise like out of Darwin, it gives you one thing. You realise how high and how fast these crocs can jump. And you know, that's what everyone gets a bit sucked in about crocodiles, because they see them looking docile like that one is, just floating on the top of the water. But when he goes, you can see how fast he just comes in from out of nowhere. Past that
meters from their normal depth.
Watch out.
Oh, it's a cod. He's got the biggest one of the day so far.
Oh, it's a cod. It's a good cod too. He's got a big croc, 3 meters or so. So get off there. Yeah. Get off the edge of the boat. He'll chomp you. Come on.
There's a particular curiosity in this maze of channels that Richard wants to show us. The Australians call this phenomenon horizontal waterfalls.
Yeah, there's a lot of water trying to get in or out of these gaps, so it causes these eddies, whirlpools. It's a pretty, we're very lucky at the moment because it's almost slack water, but still there's this much turbulence. So you can imagine what it's like at flood tide. It's extremely dangerous. We wouldn't be coming through here in a flood tide. 24, 26 feet is the difference between high and low tide. And that amount of water coming through these tiny crevices and rock gorges and that, tremendous amount of energy, huge amount of water being moved. All that turbulence and water exchange also increases the amount of oxygen in the water for food life, for our pearl shell and for all other fish species.
In Vansittart Bay, a little further north, the pearl harvest has just gotten underway. For Richard and all his co-workers, this is a period of feverish activity. And now we'll finally get to see the fruit of all this effort. And they say it's never the same thing twice.
This shell now is probably 7 years old. It was 3 to 5 when it was fished on the 80 Mile beach. It's had another 2 years grow out. And it's been cleaned more than 50 times in that 2-year period, carefully by our farm workers. And it was delivered to the ship last night, opened this morning, and there we have beautiful pearl. Let's go upstairs and see what's come out of the harvest today.
To produce these little shimmering pearls, a whole battery of techniques and equipment has been mobilized. But without the natural nursery of the Buccaneer Islands, would these little gems attain this superb quality?
That is a beautiful pearl. You can hardly see the shoulders of this pearl. You look through them. Very, very pleased. This is going to be a good harvest. To see such promise, such nice colour, nice clean pearls, nice shapes. This is exciting.
Richard has to take his precious cargo to Darwin. We'll take advantage of the seaplane to leave this magical spot. But Richard will soon be back here in this territory so removed from civilization.
Yeah, I've just picked up those boys. We're on our way back from here.
Copy that.
Seen about 20. And we're just on our way back to Mount Dare, which is at the top end of South Australia. We really are in the centre of Australia and on the western edge of the Simpson Desert. This is just a sample of the great roads that we have around here. We're very isolated. 500k from Alice Springs, 1,300 kilometres from Adelaide. And yes, Rock is a day's drive away, so we're sort of a long way from everywhere. We just get used to hundreds of kilometres when you drive.
Mount Dare Station, an unlikely settlement plopped down right on the edge of the Simpson Desert. It's one of those places where life makes a dogged stand. All around for 500 kilometers in any direction, there's nothing but sand and rocks. It looks like a scene out of Mad Max, but a lot less violent and a lot more laid back. Here in the middle of nowhere, but in the dead center of Australia, is where Dave has chosen to make his home along with his wife and children. He came here 7 years ago and took over a half-abandoned service station. Mount Dare Station is the only post for the brave souls venturing into the vast uninhabited and uninhabitable desert, where the temperature often gets up to 50 degrees Celsius. People never stay here long. They're just passing through.
Cooking breakfast 1 minute and then you're out fixing cars the next. Then getting ready with the post, and some days can be flat out in here.
Dave is the only person you can count on if you get lost in this hostile environment. This spot does have the one natural resource that made it possible for Dave to settle here: a source of water. Everything else has to be brought in from the outside, and that means far away.
This is all the supplies we need to look after all the tourists that come through. And at this time of year it's very busy, so as you can see we've got quite a load on at the moment. Takes us about 7 hours in the truck. It's usually 2 nights in town. And yeah, then we get back here, unload it, rush off and go and do another job. You do have to plan well ahead, and if you forget something, well, it's weeks before you get it. And our vegetable supplier forgot our lettuces. No lettuces. That's it.
A round trip to the nearest store is a 1,000-kilometer expedition, half of it on god-awful tracks.
We don't really have a local trade. There are some cattle properties not too far away from here, but they're 70 kilometres nonetheless. That's over an hour's drive, so we don't often see the neighbours, and it's sometimes a special occasion when we do see them.
As for social life, aside from the passing travelers and the hired hand, Dave, his wife, and children have only each other to talk to. And the kids can hardly invite friends over for their birthday parties. But the family has found a way of life that suits them just fine.
Here we go. My wife Melissa and my 2 little angels. We've got the eldest one Charlotte and the little girl Crystal Ann. They love it. We've just come back from Alice Springs, where we've been to the Alice Springs show, so we've got the bubble machine and show bags and all sorts of stuff.
Just enrolled Charlotte. She's 3.5 for next year. She does kindergarten. It'll be correspondence through Alice Springs, and the year after that, then it'll be over the internet for School of the Year. They can see their teacher through via the camera on the internet, and they can do music, they can do dancing, painting, anything they can learn is on the internet, and they've got a 99.9% attendance rate. So, and it's the biggest classroom in Australia. It is throughout outback Queensland, Northern Territory, South Australia, Western Australia. So it is just huge.
Charlotte's class, which has about 50 pupils, is the biggest in the world. It extends over a territory almost the size of a continent.
We're going out to the airfield to go and get the plane. The plane brings the mail in every Wednesday. And they take one of these, all their outgoing mail, and we collect our incoming mail.
My name's Rich, and I fly the mail plane for Chartier, based out of Alice Springs. It involves delivering mail to remote homesteads, communities around the centre of Australia. This company has the longest mail run in the world. There are mail runs that 3 hours flying in a straight line to get to the first stop.
Morning. Good. And I've been preoccupied and forgot to bring you a drink out, but you're quite welcome to come over to the pub and grab one if you want one. Yeah, just the one, probably 2 kilos. Everyone looks forward to mail day, and We'll sit around the table and divvy out all of the mail and work out who's been ordering the most things.
We have probably 9 mail runs on our books that go as far as West Australia, South Australia, and into northern Queensland. And it can take you all day, a good 8.5, 9 hours of flying to complete a mail run. And that's a pretty big day.
These postmen of the desert are the spiritual heirs of the early pioneering